it's Lee from colouringqueen.net, and today I thought we'd have a colouring chat. It's been a while and it's Halloween. I'm colouring the picture that Joanna Basford gave away a couple of years ago now from Ivy and the Inky Butterfly, the little Halloween picture. And I thought I'd use my Inktense pencils today and then colour over it with maybe some Prismacolors or pencils. We'll see how we go. I actually haven't felt like colouring Halloween pictures, and I'm looking around on the internet and I see so many people colouring some gorgeous pictures out there, but I'm just not feeling the vibe at the moment. But I thought I'd give one a crack. So it's the freebie from Joanna, and I've just printed it out on Quill 125 gram paper, so it's not watercolor paper, and so I expect it to buckle, but that's okay. I'll just press it down with a pile of books, because honestly I have so many books to press it down with. So I thought, I don't know really any ghost stories that I want to share on YouTube for Halloween. So I thought I might talk today about some movies that are scary that you might want to watch over Halloween, and that are loosely based or maybe based on real life events. So, and I'm going to completely butcher the names, so fair warning. So the first one is The Ring. Now, David really wanted to see this movie and I didn't, because as you know, I scare easily. Bunnies and butterflies are my happy place, and flowers in my garden. And there's some types of scary movies that I won't talk about at all, because I tell you what, the other day when I was researching these scary movies, and I'm not even going to say the name because it freaks me out, I was researching one movie and then I went down to have a little nap, as you do, little nana nap, and I had the weirdest dream and it was really scary, and there were like all these sheets turning into dead bodies and flying around, and I said, that's it, I'm not even going to talk about this movie because even just thinking about it freaks me out. I don't know why, but there's a certain genre of movies that really freak me out. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. So the first one is The Ring, and David really wanted to see this. I didn't want to see it at all because, as you know, I scare easily. Bunnies and flowers, that's my motto. And anyway, he of course fell asleep in the middle of it and left me to watch the whole thing by myself. And to be honest, it wasn't that scary. So if I can handle it, some of you that don't like scary things as much as like me might be able to handle it as well. But The Ring and the book, the film, The Ring's a book and a film, and it's sort of based on a Japanese legend of the Okiki ghost. I'm really not sure how to pronounce it. There's a few different interpretations of the story going around. One is that, and in all of them, a cuckoo was a maid. So she was a maid at the mansion of a Japanese samurai. And that part of the story doesn't seem to change no matter what interpretation you're looking at. But as part of her duties as a maid, one thing that she had to do was look after these valuable gold plates. In one version, they're Dutch plates, and they were in a set of 10. Now, apparently, the samurai took a bit of a shine to her, and even though he had a wife, he tried to seduce her, and in some stories he wanted to marry her, and in others he just wanted to have her as a mistress. And she wasn't too keen on that idea. She said a big no to that one. And in one version of the story, he decided that he would hide one of these plates that she was responsible for that were incredibly valuable, and if she didn't become his mistress. And as part of her duties, if she didn't look after them and one of them was lost, she would end up being tortured to death. And if she did do what he said, then he would bring back the plate and she would have to be his mistress or his wife, depending on which one you believed. And apparently she found either of those alternatives to be completely unacceptable. Of course, he said that he would tell everyone that she had stolen the plate rather than he had hidden it, and of course people would be more likely to believe him rather than a little maid. So she, in one version of the story, decides that she will drown herself in the well. And in another version of the story, it's the samurai who decides, well, hey, if I can't have you, I'm going to murder you and throw you down this well. In any event, poor Okuku ends up in the well. Of an evening, she's said to climb or crawl out of the well and appear to the samurai each night. And she screams at him. And she can also be heard apparently counting up these plates. And when she gets to 1 plate, 2 plates, and when she gets up to 9 and realises that the 10th plate is not there, she goes into rages, and ultimately the samurai was said to have been driven insane by the ghost of Okuku. And so, of course, Okuku is still down the well. And so Okuku's well, as it's known in Japan, is now a destination spot for tourists to visit. It's still located outside the castle where the samurai had lived, but it now has wrought iron bars covering it, so perhaps that Okuku can't get out. Or maybe it's so others can't get in. I don't know. But that's the story of The Ring, and the film is loosely based on that one. And I didn't find the film that scary, but I don't know, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm feeling it's a little bit more scary than I thought initially. So the next one is An American Haunting, and this is on Netflix at the moment. I've never seen this movie. It doesn't really have good reviews online, but people really refer to it as a great scary movie, so I guess it's worth seeing. I don't know that I want to, though, even though it is on Netflix. We'll see. Maybe if David keeps me company, I get scared of ghost stories. But this one's set in the 1800s, and it's set in Tennessee, and it's about the family of John Bell, and he moved his family, that was him and his wife, and his 6 children, to Tennessee, to a place called Adams. And from 1817 to about 1821, the family experienced all sorts of weird phenomena from an entity that ultimately identified herself as the Old Cape Bats Witch. Now, the Bell's Witch, as she became known as, was able to speak, and she could be in 2 places at once, and she was also a little bit clairvoyant. And all sorts of weirdness went on at this family farm. So some members of the family experienced more phenomena than others, mainly John Bell Sr. and his daughter Betsy, but other members and even strangers that had come to take a peek at the Bell's Witch also told of really strange happenings. Inside the house there were reports of knocking heard along the doors and the walls. And the family heard sounds of gnawing on the beds and invisible dogs fighting and chains along the floor. Sheets were pulled from the beds where the children slept. And soon, apparently, the Bell's Witch was pulling hair and scratching the children, and particularly Betsy, who she slapped and pinched and stuck with pins. But all of the family experienced the Bell's Witch in some way, but it was mainly John and Betsy, and apparently the Bell's Witch was particularly displeased when Betsy became engaged to a local farmer. And in the end, a few years later, she called off her engagement to the farmer because the witch was giving her such a hard time. And at that stage, the witch said that she would leave, but she would return in 7 years from that time, which she did. But Betsy experienced apparitions of young girls swinging from the limbs of an oak tree. John Bell Sr. experienced seeing dogs that appeared to be there, but when he shot at them, there was nothing there, just apparitions. His son also seen birds and they would disappear. And as well, people that worked on the farm or slaves on the farm, they also seen dogs as well and all sorts of other things. And it became quite well known so that people would be coming by to see if this witch actually existed. So neighbours came by and they were startled that the Bells Witch seemed to know so many Bible verses and could repeat them. And as I said, the witch talked. And she'd apparently get into religious arguments with people or amuse herself by telling strangers about other things that were going on in other households that she was appearing in. So she seemed to like to get around, and she seemed a bit of a gossip, to be honest, and she also seems like she was a bit mischievous as well. But yeah, people were surprised at her knowledge of the Bible and the way that she could be in different places at the same time. Now, it's alleged that the former president of the United States, Andrew Jackson, spent a night there with his troops and with his farmers, and reportedly he said he'd rather face the entire British Army than spend another night with the Bell Witch. So who knows what went on there. But she would be a little bit playful. At one stage she told them that she was a native spirit and she sort of sent them on a wild goose chase looking for buried treasure. So I don't know, I think she had a bit of a sense of humour about her. And she could repeat different conversations and sermons and whatnot. So this witch really knew her stuff. And people devised little tests, like they'd ask her something about what one of their relatives said, and she'd be able to repeat it, not knowing those people, or from different countries. Like an Englishman stopped to visit, and the witch was able to mimic his English parents, and that seems impossible, but apparently that was happened. Now, she was very nice to John Bell's wife, Lucy, and she called her the most perfect woman to walk the earth, and she would apparently gift her with fresh fruit and sing hymns to her. But she said all along that she was going to kill John Bell Sr., and or old Jack as she referred to him, and she was going to curse him, and ultimately when he died the witch said that she had actually poisoned him, and she took credit for it. She was quite pleased with that. But it seems bizarre. But anyway, a lot of other people feel that this story was a bit bizarre too, and that it wasn't actually real life events. And so some people say that this book was actually an entire fabrication, and it was based on some papers that were written some 60 years prior that were compiled into a volume of papers, and then that material was used to write a book. And the whole thing, instead of being like a real urban legend or a real event, was actually just the basis for a novel or a little story that became an urban legend. But later on, only a few years ago, I think, from memory, a ghost hunter and writer, Sue Clifton, teamed up with a clairvoyant, and they wrote a book about the Bells Witch, and they actually said that it wasn't the family that was cursed. They said it was the land that was cursed, and the strange sounds were reported around the cabin, and they also spoke with a spirit that they called Kate, and they believed that it was the land associated rather than the actual family. But who knows? Who knows with these stories? But ultimately it's made a movie for us to get scared by, so I don't know if you believe in clairvoyance or ghosts, but either way, the movie might entertain you for an hour or so on Halloween. Now, the third ghost story that I'm going to talk about is the movie Veronica, which came out in 2017. It's a Spanish movie, and it's actually based on the events of Estefania Lazaro, which I have no idea. I got kicked out of Spanish at school. I was a horrid student. That's why I became a teacher. And Estefania was very keen on the occult, as a lot of teenagers go through that stage, and some make it their careers and life. But Estefania started dabbling in the occult as a teenager, and she even brought her interest in the occult to school. And so at one stage she performed a seance at school using a Ouija board, and she was hoping to try and contact one of her friend's boyfriends. Now, he had recently died in a motorbike accident, and I guess they were just trying as young teenagers to get some closure on the death and deal with their grief. And at that time, her friends described seeing strange smoke coming up through her mouth and nose, and nothing more happened because the teacher broke up this seance, which doesn't seem like it should have been in the school curriculum. That was a little joke. But after this event, and I don't know if Estefania was still dabbling in the occult at home, but after this event, Estefania started to suffer from seizures and hallucinations, and she described strange human forms that would come and visit her at night with no face and wearing a cloak and asking her to come along with them. And then she would sometimes go into a rage with her family, and she would apparently bark at her brothers, or she'd tell her parents she saw evil shadows. And her parents were really worried, and they took her to see several doctors and hospitals, but on examination no one could find anything physically wrong with her. So time progresses, and Estefania violently attacked her sister Marianela, and she ended up on the floor with foam coming out of her mouth, which seems to be an unusual reaction, and I don't know what sort of attack this was, but it sounds to me like epilepsy, but who knows. Anyway, the day after this attack on her sister, Estefania had a serious attack of catalepsy, and she's taken to the hospital in a coma, and later on that night she dies. And the autopsy doesn't explain the reason for the death, it just says a sudden and suspicious death. And her parents said they thought that the death had something to do with the Ouija board, because they started to experience strange things going on in the house afterwards. There were doors slamming, electrical appliances switching on and off, and the mother could hear the voice of Estefania calling her from the rooms of the house, and the laughter of an old man crossing the walls. They could also hear glass breaking, and there was no reason for that. They could hear objects moving, doors opening and closing on their own. And one night, the mother feels someone touching her hands and feet while she sleeps. Creepy. Another night, the little daughters woke up terrified with their wrists being slammed violently against the wall. 2 years after Estefania's death, the photo of her hanging in the living room caught fire, and the part that burned was just one part depicting the face, while the frame and other objects nearby weren't damaged. At that stage, the family decided to call on the police, and the inspector who was assigned this case was Jose Negre. And I don't know what on earth you would say to the police, help, I'm being haunted. It just seems weird. Anyway, they actually turned up and they arrived, and they found the whole family outside in the rain, terrified. The police officers went in and inspected the premises, And the report that they wrote has been bandied around the internet for some time. It's kind of amazing that police would write on a report that what they found was a situation of mystery and rarity. And you can look up the report online, and hopefully your Spanish is better than mine. And in their report, the police officers describe the doors of a wardrobe that opened violently, despite being locked a few seconds before, and it almost hit the face of one of the police officers. He talks about loud noises coming from the balcony when there was no one there, and a strange brown slime that had formed on a bedside table. The report also describes a crucifix which was hung on the wall when the agents arrived, and then it was on the ground when they left, and it was torn from the wood that it was mounted on. There were 3 claw scratches visibly on the wall where it was hung, and then ripped out from the wall. So, I don't know. The agents also inspected the bathroom, and according to the family, the most haunted place in the house, and they felt a sudden drop of temperature that they reported that they'd never felt that extreme drop before. Skeptics say that there could be reasons for this. It could be toxic mould, or maybe carbon monoxide, or there might even be a case for family hysteria, because Stefania's mother was subjected to a psychological assessment, and she did have signs of emotional instability, anxiety, and also a need for attention, so she might have accentuated the magnitude of the events. But who knows? I don't know. What do you think? I don't know. Then there's the case of The Entity, which, that's a scary movie, isn't it? Oh, I watched that one when I was a teenager and it still frightens me. So The Entity is based on the case of Doris Bither, who was a Californian housewife. And in 1974, she alleged that there were 3 ghosts, male ghosts, that were raping her. And her story inspired a book called The Entity, which was then made into the film of the same name. And I still get scared of The Entity, I've got to say. So Doris had 4 children, and she had a history of physical and substance abuse. She had a traumatic childhood. Things were a bit rough for poor Doris, and she made some poor relationship choices with men, and she didn't have a good relationship with her 4 sons, and her house was falling apart, and it had actually been condemned twice. So it was all a little bit sad, her life. But she told this story that of these men, and she was very consistent that she was being raped by these 3 spirits. And people initially wrote off her claims because she was drinking, and it could have been alcohol induced, which of course it could. But her children also told the same stories, and she was approached by some investigators at the UCLA campus who were part of the now defunct parapsychology lab, and they investigated and noted her story, and that forms the basis of really a lot of what we know about Doris's experiences. But at one stage they managed to photograph one of the luminaries, or one of the... Doris's son, Brian, did an interview, and he said that they all experienced some form of attack, not just his mother. There was pushing, there was biting, there was scratching being done to the children, and there were about 4 entities in the home, according to Brian, and they made themselves known by appearing all the time. And he feels that it was always like a fog, like a human, but not quite, like this sort of foggy presence. And during one incident, when Brian was in his early teens, he tried to stop the spirit attacking his mother, and he was thrown across the room, And you can actually read Brian's interview if you want a little scare, and you can look online for that. His name's Brian Harris. And Doris said that that in the attacks, the two smaller people, would hold her down while the third larger entity attacked her. And these bodies left marks on her body that indicated rape, and including bruises on her inner thighs and her throat. And the combined interviews with all of the family convinced the UCLA investigators that there was some sort of paranormal phenomena, and the investigators wanted to try and provoke their appearance so that they could document this and catch it on film. And many were caught on film, and there were 20-something researchers present at this, and they witnessed a lot of occurrences that took place. I don't want to spoil the movie for you, though. Doris died in 1995 at the age of 58. She had a multiple organ failure, and her ultimate death was never determined. A lot of people say that the events that took place at Doris's home is kind of a bit like a weird victim blaming. Blame Doris for what happened because of her negative energy and the fact that her parents were abusive, and she then dated abusive men, and she didn't have good relationships, and she had a negative energy, and she didn't really get along that well with her children. And many just sort of blame Doris for conjuring up a negative energy around the home that made these events take place. So it seems kind of weird to victim blame a ghost. Other people blame her alcoholism on the events. Her children state that these spirits were present, so you would think that they're independent witnesses. I don't know. I have no idea, but according to the records that the paranormal investigators took, more than 24 investigators watched as strange lights began to appear. A green mist formed in the corner. There was a neon vortex, and apparently grew into a male torso and became visible. And at one stage they were able to capture one of these. So they had high-speed cameras and professional photographers, but there were so many lights flashing around that they weren't able to capture a lot of the material. But they did manage to capture a floating arc-like light and some orbs showing up in the pictures, and meaning if it were being projected, the arc would be bent, so it couldn't be fake, and that meant it actually was floating in space, and it's dimensional. And the negative of the photo has been authenticated and published by Popular Photography, proving that it wasn't a fake photograph and that there was actually something there that they captured on film. I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know. I'd love to hear from you guys if you believe in ghosts, and I will say that I do believe in ghosts, and I have had some ghosty experiences, or experiences that I cannot explain and don't know how to explain, but I don't know. I really have no idea on all of these things. It's all strange and it's weird, but I do think it's weird that a lot of people just blame Doris for everything that happened to her. And in one of those instances, they're saying that when she was sober, there were no manifestations of these. So maybe it was hallucinations that she had when she was under the influence of alcohol, and her children picked up on that and mimicked her behaviour and modelled her behaviour as you do. I don't know. But they certainly believed in something, and the investigators certainly believed that there was something there. I don't know. Might be one to watch this Halloween. So I hope you have found something that might occupy your time on Halloween while you're dishing out the candy or the lollies, as we call them here in Australia. I'm not going to do any dishing out this year, I don't think. I might change my mind at the last minute, you never know. But Millie has got a little Halloween outfit that hopefully she will model for you, and she's got a little witch's hat and she's got a little skull garter. So, it's a little skull necklacey thing. So I hope she models one of them so that you can see her little creepy look. That's it from me. I hope you enjoyed this video. And until next time, stay safe, have fun on Halloween, and happy colouring.